We all think we know what a police encounter looks like. But what if something as simple as an officer asking for your driver's license could flip a casual chat into a full-blown legal seizure, kicking your Fourth Amendment rights into gear? Today, we're going to unpack a really fascinating case that hangs on that very question. So let's just ask it outright. When are you legally seized by the police? Sounds like a simple question, right? But the answer is way more complicated than you might think. It's not always about handcuffs or being told you're under arrest. That line can get really blurry, and it's the absolute heart of the case we're looking at today, United States versus Carl Jordan. So our story starts at a bus station. Picture this. You've got four plainclothed officers, and they're there doing drug interdiction work, basically looking for drug trafficking. They're watching passengers come and go, and one man, Carl Jordan, kind of catches their eye. And this one little moment kicks off a whole chain of events that would eventually land in federal court. As this whole thing began, everything seemed totally routine. The officers noticed Mr. Jordan getting off the bus with just a small bag, which they thought was a little odd. He meets up with someone in the parking lot, and that's when the officers walk over. One of them asks if they can talk, and Jordan says sure. He hands over his license and bus ticket when they ask. He even agrees to let them search his tote bag. I mean, on the surface, this looks like a completely consensual, voluntary interaction. And boom, that consensual search turns up something big. Over 50 grams of cocaine plus a little bit of marijuana. So Mr. Jordan gets hit with federal charges for possession with intent to distribute. Now, based on this, it seems like a total slam dunk for the prosecution. I mean, he said they could search the bag. They found the drugs. End of story, right? Well, not so fast. You see, the Fourth Amendment says that a search without a warrant is generally illegal. But, and this is a big but, consent is one of the major exceptions. If you say yes to a search, the officers don't need a warrant. And since Jordan agreed, it really seems like the search was totally legal. But this is where his defense team pulls out a really clever and pretty unexpected argument. This whole case, which looked so cut and dry, was about to get flipped completely on its head. Because the defense decided they weren't going to fight about the search itself. No, they were going to focus on the moments that happened before the search even began. So here's the argument. The defense said Jordan's consent wasn't valid because it was tainted. Tainted by what? They claimed it was tainted by an illegal seizure that happened the moment the officer took his driver's license and didn't immediately give it back. All of a sudden, the focus of this entire case shifts from the drugs in the bag to the plastic ID in the officer's hand. Okay, to really wrap our heads around this argument, we have to define what a seizure actually means in the eyes of the law. The Fourth Amendment protects us from unreasonable seizures of our person, not just our stuff. So what's the tipping point? When does a simple police encounter turn into a seizure? So the law basically defines a seizure of a person as a restraint of liberty. This can happen in two main ways. The first one is obvious, physical force. But the second way is much more subtle. It's what's called a show of authority. This is when the actions of the police, without even touching you, would make you feel like you're not free to just walk away. Now, in Mr. Jordan's case, there was no physical force. The officers didn't grab him, they didn't put him in handcuffs before he consented to the search. And that means this entire legal question hinges on that second path. Was there a show of authority big enough that a reasonable person in Jordan's shoes would not have felt free to leave? The Supreme Court actually has a test for this, kind of like a checklist. To figure out if a show of authority seizure happened, courts ask three questions. First, looking at the whole situation, would a reasonable person feel like they couldn't leave? Second, was that feeling of being trapped caused by what the police did? And third, did the person actually give in or submit to that show of authority? All right, so let's take that abstract legal test and apply it to something very real, something most of us have in our wallets, a driver's license. How does this everyday piece of plastic fit into this high-level constitutional debate? Well, this is where the law gets super specific. And here is the key, the absolute crux of the matter. An officer just asking you for your ID is not by itself a seizure, but the whole dynamic shifts the second you hand it over. The critical factor is what the officer does next. If they look at it and hand it right back, it's still just a consensual encounter. But if they hold on to it, well, the game has just changed. The court's logic here is really powerful. Just think about it for a second. An officer is holding your ID. That's the document you need to drive a car, to get on a plane, to prove who you are. The court basically said, look, it is hard to imagine any reasonable person feeling free to just turn around and walk away while a cop is still holding that document. At that point, the friendly chat has become a seizure. So, what happened in Jordan's case? The entire legal theory depended on this one fact. But get this, during the hearing, the officer was asked 3 different times if he gave the license back before asking to search the bag, and his answer was, I can't remember. Because that crucial fact was up in the air, the appeals court couldn't make a final call. They had to send the case back down, or remand it, to the lower court to figure out that one critical detail. Was the officer still holding the license? Okay, so this case isn't just some technical legal squabble. It has real-world meaning for any of us who might interact with law enforcement. It helps draw a clearer line between just having a conversation and being in a situation where our constitutional rights are fully engaged. So let's boil it all down. What are the big takeaways here? First, the Fourth Amendment protects you, your person, not just your stuff, from unreasonable seizures. Second, a seizure can happen either by physical force or through that more subtle show of authority. Third, the main test for that show of authority is whether a reasonable person in your shoes would feel free to leave. And finally, the big lesson from this case, if an officer takes your ID and doesn't give it back right away, that interaction is almost certainly crossed the line and become a seizure in the eyes of the law. And that really leaves us with one final question to think about. I want you to put yourself in that situation for a moment. An officer is standing in front of you, holding your driver's license. Forget the legal jargon for a second. In that moment, do you honestly, truly feel like you're free to just turn around and walk away? This case really forces us all to think about where that line between cooperation and coercion actually is.